Many of you may have seen or used my original practice videos, and I made those like 7 years ago because I wanted to put out a practice that was simple and contemplative and geared towards well-being and a lessening of pain, rather than the accomplishment of forms or a lot of the other stuff that usually sells well. We had all these slogans, gentle is the new advanced and slower is stronger. And I was just putting myself out there to sell it, try to make simple sexy, you know. And I felt good about that. I feel like a lot of people have benefited from those videos. But as things have evolved, I felt that there was really something missing about it, something that didn't capture the essence of the practice principles that I teach, which was that it was just me. You didn't get to see what it looks like in other kinds of people and other expressions. So that's what we did. The new 60-minute version of the practice, which we call the multi-student version, you get to see individual expressions of the same program. And it looks like what, to me, like yoga looks like in like regular people. And I'm very happy to finally have it be available to you. So it's the J. Brown Yoga Practice 2nd edition, and you can go check it out at jbrownyoga.com. Okay. Here we are. This is J. Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is J. Brown. Thank you to whoever you are that has chosen to listen to this. I'm wondering how everyone's negotiations are going. Did you decide to go to that restaurant, get takeout, or did you even try to sit maybe outside? Did you let your friend come over, even though you're not sure if they've been all that strict about their contact with others? Did you let your kid play with that other kid? Did you let him go inside? If you did, right? It's all a whole series of negotiations, isn't it? And I have to admit that I'm recording this on the 1st of August. And there's still no real indication that I'm going to be able to travel to places in the world, or that I can do the work that I was doing of in-person teaching as I was doing it. And I mentioned some months back that I got some assistance from my government to help me through this time, but that is going to run out. And I don't know, I've been really feeling very emotional and a little bit overwhelmed this last week. Actually, I'll tip my hat for a moment. I had a conversation with Max Strom yesterday about this, and you're going to get to hear it in 2 weeks. And I'm really feeling a lot of grief. I know the feeling of grief. Those of you who listen to the show maybe have heard me talk about my mom and how much dealing with that loss meant to me and played into the yoga that I do and teach. And I know the feeling of grief, but I haven't had anybody close to me die recently. Let me knock on some wood. I know people who have had people pass, but I haven't had death happen directly to me in these months of this pandemic. But I know the feeling of grief, and what I've been grieving is the collapse of, the thing that I was kind of railing against on the show all the time. I was always saying, yoga went from underground to mainstream, and I want to, rekindle and have a renaissance of the soul. And And all of that involved gathering, and I guess at some point we're going to gather again, but at this moment, there's no real clear indication of when. And I know it's happening in little places around the world. People are starting to have classes again. I guess there's a lot of outside classes happening. But like I started, it's just all this one big negotiation. I mentioned also about the plan for my kids to go back to school. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned all the specifics of the plan, but the way it's been fleshing out since has really shown to me that there's a whole range of other problems that we're facing, regardless of what the schools choose to do. I mean, basically, they've decided that they're going to have half the kids go to school full-time on Monday and Tuesday. Then they're going to clean the school on Wednesday. Then the second half of the kids are going to go to school full-time on Thursday and Friday. And then the other 3 days of the week, you're doing it remote. You're online learning. So we had this idea of, maybe 1, 2, or 3 parents is what I had in mind, and their kids and us kind of creating a little pool because we know our kids know each other and work together well, and we wanted to try to get them off the screens. I don't want them to be on the screens for 3 days a week. It's already a struggle to create those boundaries for myself and for them, and making so much of their schooling connected to the screens. It's just, I want to find some way to get around that. So the idea was to do some amount of parent collective homeschooling. But I was having a conversation with this one parent who we had discussed this with, and already it's like who gets to be in the pod and who doesn't get to be in the pod, and why? How big does the pod get to be? They're impossible decisions. I don't know how to make them. One thing I do know is that I cannot operate from a place of fear. I need to be able to come from a place of understanding or clarity or compassion or something other than fear. And it's hard not to feel afraid right now, given everything that's out there. I mean, even with the schools, I was talking to this other dad, and he was saying, I hope they don't reopen the schools, because he's just scared to death. He's scared to death that his kid might get sick or that someone else is going to get sick. And I understand that, but I can't just operate from fear. And the numbers, if you look at, we're supposed to go by the numbers. And if you look at the numbers here in my state, we're okay. We're fine. We have had very little new cases and almost no deaths. I mean, we're doing okay, thanks be. I know that's not true for other places in the world, other places in my country right now. But, sorry to be such a drag, but that's where I'm at right now. And I think that's where a lot of us are at. And it is also the context in which today's conversation with Barbara Verrochi takes place. Barbara and I go way back. We practiced alongside each other in the 90s. And she opened her yoga center a few years before I opened mine. And we've known not each other so directly, but we've sort of known of each other and had many mutual friends over the years. I saw her last year when I drove in and I recorded with a teacher at her center, Matthew, maybe you remember, and I saw Barbara at her center, the Shala in New York City. And I said, oh, Barbara, we should record a talk. And it has been on a list, an agenda of mine, to drive into New York City and spend a day with Barbara and record with her. And we had even talked about trying to schedule it at the end of last year, and then the pandemic hit. And I've been waiting still thinking that I would drive in, but as you'll hear, I decided that I didn't know how long I could wait. And so that's what I mean. This whole negotiations played some role in this conversation. And I really was happy to connect with Barbara. She's somebody who has, again, traveled alongside me through this wave of yoga. And she's still holding it down. I mean, the Shala is not closed. Even though they're not having in-person classes, they're not done yet. They've basically outlasted almost everybody, including the big names. So I was very intrigued to connect with Barbara, and I'm glad that you're going to get to hear it today. Real quick before we do, I'm betting that there's some people out there who are listening who are like Barbara and are still holding it down. And you're still registering people for classes, and you're still paying teachers, and you're still doing everything you can to keep the yoga going. And maybe you're using Mind Body Online, I don't know. Maybe you're using some other system that you're not super happy with. I want to suggest that you check out today's sponsor, KarmaSoft. I've been talking about KarmaSoft for years. It's the software that I used when I had my yoga center in Brooklyn. And the owner of that company, Rudy Senegal, he is a friend of mine. You can go back and listen to the episode I recorded with him. And in this moment, I think having somebody you can really work with who can individualize things for you and who gives you something that just does what you needed to do without a whole bunch of bells and whistles or a whole bunch of, small print is an invaluable thing. And I'm very happy to recommend to you KarmaSoft. So if that's you, go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, let me mention that this episode is brought to you in support by podcast premium subscribers Lynn Boardman and Catherine Sherlock. Thank you, Lynn and Catherine, for being podcast premium subscribers. It is really something that we've been doing, this shouting out of our premium subscribers, because we realize how much the premium subscribers are helping support the show. And not only that, you also get access to the full archives, but you get to choose your rate, and we do give free memberships to people who can't afford them. But if you're a regular listener to the show, it is really a beautiful gesture to make to become a podcast premium subscriber. And we are very grateful to you for doing that. If you want to learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber or find out about any of my stuff, go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that's it. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Barbara Verrochi. Okay, we've managed to get our way here. It's good to have people in the house who have tech experience, right?
Yes, my son has the tech experience, thank goodness.
Yes. Well, it's good to have someone like that around. I'm glad we got it all sorted out.
Me too.
And it's almost bittersweet that we had to sort out the tech to talk to each other, because you've been on a to-do list of mine for a long time, because we had plans to actually get together in person. We were talking about it last year, at the end of last year, and we were trying to find a time for me to come visit you, and then it didn't happen for one reason or another, and then the world fell apart. And so you're on like a to-do list of mine that I keep glancing at for months now. And I kept leaving it there thinking eventually I'll just go visit her in person. It'll be like a thing, like on the other side of this. But honestly, like at this point, it's been so long. And then we're going to go visit my in-laws. So I was like, am I really going to drive into New York right now? Is that a dumb thing to do? There's all these negotiations that have to happen whenever you're trying to try to do anything right now.
Totally.
And then I noticed that, honestly, Bend and Bloom closed down. And I was like, oh my God, are all the centers? So then I was like, I got to talk to Barbara. I don't know if I can drive in. So I'm just going to do it over the call. So here we are. I'm glad to talk to you.
Me too. I'm glad it worked. That's right. We saw each other in the studio. And then the world definitely has changed in a huge way. So I think you're smart in not probably coming in yet.
That's the one thing that I've certainly felt like, travel just doesn't, when you weigh risks and stuff right now, travel doesn't seem to be making a whole lot of sense.
No, it's also so difficult. We were going to go stay with some friends in our friend's home upstate, and just figuring out how to get there. It was so complicated that then you start to weigh out if it's worth even going.
I know. And, I had all this like international travel planned, and you can't even go anywhere with your American passport right now. And then even with it domestically, it just seems like, I don't know, just everybody's playing it safe, and I'm playing it safe too. So here we are talking via Zoom.
I saw that on your website. I was looking at your website, and I saw that you had postponed a lot of travel and have some things coming up in the States, but I guess through Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 events still on my schedule that I didn't cancel yet, that had been postponed from earlier dates. One's in September and one's in October. So I have basically about a month before I have to decide on the first one. And I just don't know. I'm still just leaving it open. One of them's in Madison, Wisconsin. One of them's in Texas, Austin, Texas. I don't know about that one.
No.
Oh, man. Oh, wow. Where are you? You live in Brooklyn, though, right?
Yes. We live in Clinton Hill.
Right. And have you started any in-person classes at the Shala yet?
No, we have done no in-person classes. I think we're considered stage 4. I don't know if stage 4 is even, I don't know if there's a stage 4 anymore, if it's opened or not. But it doesn't seem like at this moment, it doesn't make sense to open up or be in the studio, because you'd have to distance, and one of the studios is fairly large, the other is small, the one in Brooklyn. So the capacity of how many people you can even fit in there, and the air quality in the summer, all of those factors.
Well, we started in the present, but I kind of want to go back in history with you, because you've been at that space, or at least the space that was across the street. If I got it right, it was 2002 when you opened. Is that right?
Yes. June, the end of May, beginning of June of 2002.
I mean, you may be one of the only ones left around that long, because even Jiva's gone.
I know, Jiva. I know, and I think Kula still has a space. They don't have, Kula opened up the same month or something, or right around the same time we did in 2002. So the Tribeca space is closed, but that was going to be closing anyways. But they still have Soho.
Right.
So there's a few studios still around, but it's hard to maintain them in this time.
Well, especially now. I mean, I assume, are you doing online classes?
Yes, we started online, and right when we closed, I think on like March 15th or 16th, and then maybe 2 days later, we started a Zoom class. Ashley, one of our teachers, taught it, and we've been online since then, and we didn't even know what Zoom was at the time.
Well, I believe it, given the trouble we had getting this call together.
complicated.
Well, once you get it figured, I guess I've been doing it for a while. So once you get it sorted out, you know the ins and outs. It's not as much, but still, a lot of people like you had to make a quick learning curve to jump online.
Yeah. I don't think we've ever worked so hard as those first 2 weeks of trying to set it up. And luckily, we had amazing people on the back end, Ricardo and Peter and Derek and Alicia. We had a lot of help,
right,
on the back end. But it was a lot of back end to try to get that going.
Sure. Everybody knows they had to scramble a bit to figure it out.
Yes.
But like I was saying before, you did open in 2002, and I'm trying to think back. I kind of remember when you guys opened at that spot. Wasn't it on Broadway?
Yes, it was across the street from where you
saw you. Right.
Right across. Yeah, Broadway, between 12th and 11th Street.
And remind me, it wasn't you alone. I know you had a partner in crime. Yeah. Who what's her name again? Forgive me.
Kristen Lee. Who's still my partner.
After all of these years, I mean, I gotta say, I've known a lot of collaborative yoga center efforts over the years, and they've always not lasted. It's a real testament to you guys and your friendship.
It is. We have a really amazing friendship, and being a partner with someone is like being in a marriage with them, right? That's why it's so hard.
So why do you remember what was in your mind when you decided to open? I mean, it was just such a completely different time, 2002. Oh. Everything was on the uprise, and, everybody was opening centers, but you guys got that pretty good spot right there on Broadway, which I guess was a little bit like you were sort of, I don't know, the indie folks who had your spot not too far from Jiva. Was there tensions? Like, do you remember what it was like when you opened?
Let's see. So 2000, we had, 9/11 was, maybe 8 or 9 months previous. So 9/11, really changed the city. And I think that when we opened in Union Square, it was before Jivamukti had moved over and Om had moved over and Ishta and Yoga Vida.
I see. So Union Square hadn't become the rally point yet.
It wasn't quite yet. No. And it was kind of a space that we found that was between where we both lived. She was living downtown. I was up in the 20s, and we were kind of trying to find something in between. So that when our realtor showed us that space, we were like, wow, that's perfect. That's beautiful. And it was a time to, like I said, after 9/11, there was a lot of commercial space available. And it was kind of a different time in New York City where, two women could be like, let's open a business. So it was, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was definitely easier than now to make that decision. And I think that's why there were so many yoga studios, right? I think you opened one not long after.
That's right, in 2007. And I do remember, I decided I wanted to open a center. I remember going to Bank of America to open up some bank accounts, and they just gave me these crazy lines of credit. Everybody wanted to help. It was a much easier time to do stuff. And that was, of course, right before that financial crash in 2007, which changed that some.
Yes.
But in the early 2000s, absolutely, it felt pretty easy to do.
It was kind of easy. And New York City, I think, was, I mean, I've been in New York City since 1985. And I think even then, at that point, it was still a city that was accessible to many people. And you didn't have to be super wealthy to be in it. And it was creative and it was a creative and exciting time for yoga too, I think.
And where were you coming from? Were you a Jiva student? Were you an Ashtanga person? Where were you coming from when you opened the center?
Well, I started practicing in 1990, and I was practicing at Jivamukti and I would go to Iyengar classes and Dharma Mitra and Shivananda.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of moving around. I was also really interested in dance, so it was so easy. You could go take a class at Merce Cunningham or Eric Hawkins or Martha Graham's studio. And a friend of mine, I was teaching art in public schools and my back hurt from standing all day. And she was like, go take a yoga class. So I started practicing at these places. Then I loved the Jiva Mukti method. And while I was practicing there, they started teaching Ashtanga. So I started practicing Ashtanga.
So you remember when that first got there? Because I always talk about that. I talk about how there was this brief period of time before everybody knew what Ashtanga was. And then Ashtanga showed up and it changed things because it made it like sweatier and the gyms started to have it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, exactly.
So you remember when it first started to show up at Jiva?
Yeah, I was there when it started to show up at Jiva, and I think even Pattabhi Jois had gone to Jiva Mukti. I missed that completely at the time, but it was in the early 90s. And then at some point, I think around 1996, I started going to Eddie Stern's studio. He had an Ashtanga studio for a while. And I was teaching art, so I needed to get up really early to practice. So I started practicing with him very early. And at some point in teaching art, the gym teacher left. And so they wanted me to be the gym teacher and teach yoga. So I started teaching yoga in the public schools. And that's why I did the training at Jiva Mukti in 98, 99.
I see. So you could have a certificate because you were going to teach in the schools.
No, I didn't even need a certificate. I just didn't feel like I should be I felt like I needed some training.
Right. Makes sense. And the training in 1998, that was probably a year-long program, right?
A year-long program. It was a very long program. It was a really amazing program. And I think there were around 30 of us, many of the people from that time I'm still in touch with. Kristen was one of them, and we got very close during the training because we were always studying together.
Is that when you met?
No, we knew each other early. She was probably practicing even before 1990, but we had known each other from the studio, and she worked for David and Sharon. So right. When you'd come up the 2nd Avenue stairs, often Kristen was sitting there.
Oh, right, at that little wooden thing at the top of the stairs, right? Exactly. And they had like the closet that opened up that had the incense that you could get. Right? Wow.
Right. Yeah. So we did that training. We taught there for about 3 years. And then we were teaching also at Crunch, right? Crunch had a great yoga program. I might have been teaching a Perry dance. I'm not even sure. And then we decided to go off and do our own thing.
Now, I'm curious, first, if I can put it into context, which training did you do? Because there was some of those really early trainings like Kachi was in.
No,
and then there was the first one that they charged money that Lilia was in.
Yes. We were right after that. I think we were after the Lilia and maybe Kelly Morris and I forget, maybe Christopher Hildebrandt was in that group.
Okay. So I see it was after they kind of made it more of a method. And they told everybody that you had to come to Kirtan, and then some people got annoyed and left.
I don't know if it was a method yet.
Okay.
It was maybe moving in that direction. And then they started the month-long later on. That month-long. But this was still a year, and it was when they had just moved to Lafayette.
Right.
The training was there.
Oh, with the waterfall.
Yeah.
I remember they went from that. They went from that grubby space above like the Thai food restaurant on 2nd Avenue to that really swanky one on Lafayette with the waterfall.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. So what was your, I mean, I guess, did you consider I guess you were a Jiva Mukti teacher. You taught there for 3 years, right? What was your relationship like with Sharon and David?
I had a good relationship with Sharon and David. I feel like when I started practicing with them in the early 90s, really they changed my world in a big way. I had been raised Catholic and had stopped practicing Catholicism. And I feel like their Dharma talks in the beginning of class, which we still do to this day, a Dharma talk, which is largely from them. I feel like those really brought me back to a spiritual practice. So I loved those early classes. I had a lot of fun in them.
I hear you. I showed up in, I believe it was like 93, 94, and I was taking David's classes. I always liked David's classes more than Sharon, but for the same reason, because there were so many ideas. It wasn't just the forms. And I mean, at the same time though, I took his class regularly, but we never like spoke. Like I never interacted with him.
I think we must have been practicing together then.
Probably. I imagine so. I imagine we did.
In the purple room.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Although eventually Madonna and Sting showed up on 2nd Avenue and you couldn't get into those 6:30 classes anymore or whatever, those 6 p.m. classes. That's why I spend more time at like 10 p.m. or 12 p.m. in Kachi's class because those other classes were too packed.
Yes. Yeah.
But David's class definitely inspired me. It absolutely, as you're saying, had a big impact on how I started to see things and my life and me and the world.
Totally. I mean, the Dharma talks are that way, right? Where I think in all traditions and religions, the connecting of the teachings with stories and connections to your daily life, they were really brilliant, I think, at doing that. Both Sharon and David, all of them, Kachi, Lisa Shrem, Maria Rubinati, Ruth.
And you said something just now about the Dharma talk at the beginning. And it goes to something I've always thought about Jiva Mukti, which is that they really did shape like what we think of as a vinyasa class now. Like that kind of arc where maybe you start seated, maybe there's a Dharma talk of some sort or a theme, and then you're just seated and you do some things seated, and then you get up and do your sun salutations, and then maybe there's a few standing, then you go to the wall, and then you come back and you come down and you do your back bending, and then maybe some twisting into some seated forward bends into final rest. That kind of arc. They kind of, with a playlist, they kind of came up with that in my mind. Maybe it happened in parallel on the West Coast with Mati and Chuck over at Yoga Works, but like that became defined of what a lot of people think of as a yoga class. And I remember that was sort of formed there. Would you agree with that idea?
I think so. I mean, I know that probably there was parallel happening in California. Tim Miller talks about it often, teaching kind of an improvisational class. And, I think Sharon and David were taking information from similar places that they were on the West Coast, from the sequence of Ashtanga Yoga, from Dharma Mitra, right? And, maybe even from Iyengar classes on some level. But definitely the talk, the singing, the chanting, the talk, the moving, the rest.
Well, they both had or I know Sharon did like a performance art background.
Yeah, they remember the performances?
They used to have those performances. I remember because I wanted desperately to be in one. And then Kachi actually asked me to do one with her, like a demonstration. I was super excited, but then we didn't do it because she kind of got in a fight with them and didn't want to do it. It was later on when things got a little bit weirder, you know. In those early days, it was a very different scene. I've talked about this with people before. You know, that place was really inspiring on a lot of levels.
Totally exciting.
So you mentioned also that you studied over at Eddie's place. Was that more your regular practice? Was that happening when you were teaching at Jiva, or did you do that at a different time?
No, I started in 96 at Eddie's, and I didn't start teaching at Jivamukti till 98, 99. While we were in the training, I started teaching with them. And I think we taught until 2002, until we opened up. But yeah, I was going to Eddie's. That became my main practice, was Ashtanga Yoga. And those were great days too. That was when Eddie was on Broadway, above Houston. And at the time, the women practice on the right and the guys practice on the left.
Oh my gosh. You say that with a fondness and a romantic
I know.
sentiment,
we were so
but then
sad.
you have to hover for a second as you came out of your mouth, right?
No, it was like, I remember when he was like, okay, now we're going to mix it. And we were like, what? No, you can't mix it.
But can you imagine if someone wanted to separate the men and the women now? Like, that's what I'm saying. And we didn't think of it as a problem at that time. Not saying it wasn't a problem.
No, it was great. I actually liked it. I was like, you guys stay over there.
Well, isn't that interesting though? Because that's an interesting comment you just made. You just made a case for why it's better to separate them out. But I guess we're laughing about it. But, you know, I don't want to get into, I've had many conversations about what's happened in the Ashtanga world, you know. But you were someone who studied at that earlier time, and you make this reference to when they had it separated by gender and then they mixed it. Did you study with Pattabhi Jois? How involved were you in the community? Did you make any trips to Mysore, any of that stuff?
Yeah, sure. I went to Mysore in 97. And I probably went at least 7 or 8 times between then, 97 and the time he passed away in 2009 is the last time I was there. It's also the year I adopted my son. So traveling kind of stopped
yes.
in that way.
Well, kids will certainly anchor you somewhere.
Hey, well, you have some, right?
I got 2, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
All right, well, you just mentioned you had a long time, many trips there, so I don't even know where to start. What do you think about everything? Like, how do you, I guess here's the question I'll ask. I'll start you with like the hardest question. Because it's the question that I personally have, and I think a lot of other people have. And it has to do with that I am sure there's many things of value that you learned from Ashtanga Yoga, maybe even from Pattabhi Jois directly, as you're saying. I don't know. But at the same time, we now know of his abusive behaviors. And I think the question is always for me, how do you hold things that you learned that were of value when they came from someone that you no longer feel that you could support?
Right. Yeah. It's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, because there's the separate teacher from the teachings, but I don't always know that sounds right to me, because I don't know that you can separate it out. Or do you think that you can?
I think you can separate it out, but I think also the bigger issue is how to hold the contradiction of receiving kind of a practice from someone, like a pretty amazing practice. I still think it's like a brilliant practice. I love teaching it. I love practicing it because as I get older, I'm 58, going to be 59. I modified it. It's a self-practice. I can change it for my age. I can work with anybody, complete beginner to someone more, say, proficient in moving their body, the sequence, even though I teach vinyasa classes and I do my own sequences, the sequence is still one I always come back to and refer to. So as a practice, I think it's a brilliant practice. Pattabhi Jois as a teacher for me was, again, like Sharon David, he was a huge teacher in my life, a huge influence in my life, transformed my life in many ways. So holding that and being completely, holding that truth, right, of my experience with him, which was not the experience of being abused, right? Holding that alongside the truth that he harmed so many women, maybe even men, I'm not sure, but right, that's, I think, the place I've been sitting with for years now.
I think that given the conversations that have happened since and what has been revealed, I do think people have a more discerning eye when it comes to these matters than they did when we were going to classes.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think you were in this whole, I think you were in Ashtangi, right? In a
kind of roundabout way, never like formally, but I certainly did the practice for a bit, but I never was really studying so much in the Ashtanga school. And I definitely didn't meet Pattabhi or go to Mysore or anything. But I remember the time, and I certainly remember how, and I've talked about this a bunch of times, how there was certainly still this one foot in kind of the mystical guru traditions. They were the masters, they were the yoga masters. And it's amazing how, 15 years later, 20 years later, most, if not all of those yoga masters have had some fall, if not complete, disgrace.
Right. Yeah. It's not a good idea to put anyone on a pedestal. Right? Not a good idea. It's, I think there's the other side where people are like, let's, no teachers, no gurus. And I get that. I think it sets up a hierarchy. But I still think teachers are...
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.